Hello, hello. Welcome to Chapter 4, Diversity and Cultural Issues in the Field of Clinical Psychology. And this is a chapter that lends itself well to reading. Um, this is one of the chapters that definitely, by absorbing it, it's definitely an intellectual read. It's something that doesn't need as much explanation in terms of lecture. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time kind of doing video lecture on this chapter because this one is one that does well with case studies, kind of fleshing out the cultural competencies. It's a super, super important area. And a lot of this is kind of going to give you background in terms of kind of the context of multiculturalism and certainly how it's shaped the field of clinical psychology and how it's really a bi-directional process whereby culture informs psychology and psychology informs culture. And so it's definitely a good read and one that um, when I teach this in person, there's really fun exercises that we do to kind of challenge our all of our assumptions in terms of cultural awareness. So, with that, a little bit of context. Multiculturalism is something that has gained momentum in the 21st century, even more than in the 20th century. And when I was going for my doctorate in counseling psychology, um, the field was really trying to play catch up with how important this was. And so I went to school in Boston, and they were in the process of adding coursework for a multicultural requirement that up until that point in 2000, when I began my program, they didn't even have that requirement. So I was right on the cusp. And it is so important that we think of it almost as the fourth force or fourth wave of psychology. That's a big deal. When you think about the waves being historically like things that really kind of revolutionized the field of psychology, multiculturalism is one of those revolutions. So, psychoanalysis, aka Freud and his disciples, and actually the forerunners of Freud, because it wasn't just Freud, we'll talk about that. Freud was informed by his forerunners, and then he had people after him. Behaviorism is your classical and operant conditioning, your B.F. Skinner, your Pavlov, and we'll cover that in a later unit. And then the Carl Rogers humanistic existential, that's a third wave. And these two waves are in essence reactions against wave one. And then the fourth wave, multiculturalism, which is imbued in everything, all of these waves and everything else. Cultural competence is something that is a process, it's a lifelong process. And it's a responsibility of the clinician to be aware of the blind spots, one's own culture, one's gaps in understanding other cultures. And it's a set of skills, it's a set of knowledge, and general and specific awareness about multiculturalism. And it's super important. And it all begins with one knowing thyself. Um, if you enter any realm of helping that is more clinical, social work, mental health counseling, psychology, you will be asked to look within because you need to know your blind spots. You need to know your biases, your stereotypes, your values. You need to know how similar or different you might be to anyone. And you can't assume, right? You can't assume that you know just by kind of comparing what your background is to someone else's. It is very idiosyncratic and very unique. So when we're talking about this fourth force, We start with, again, understanding ourselves, and then we want to understand how culture has shaped in the macro sphere all the way down to the micro level our clients. And these are some of the questions that we might ask a client to really crawl into their experience. Tell me from your own experience, your own words, what's happening. Do you even define it as an illness? Do you define it as distressing, or is it simply different? If it's a problem, right? Because it may not be a problem. The problem may be someone else's that has brought this person to you. What does it do? How does it serve you? How does it not serve you? What do you think the natural cause of the problem is, or the situation? What do you think should be done about it? And what have you done? Have you done things that are more traditional or non-traditional, depending on the culture, depending on the situation and the time of life? So when we're talking about cultural competence, and again, this idea of knowledge, skills, awareness, as I mentioned, lifelong. This is something that is not, you take a course and consider yourself golden, This is something that is lifelong. And in being able to learn about your own background, the upshots and the downshots, it's a way of being humbled, and it's a way of understanding that it's not about greater than or less than, it's about different, and it's about being able for each of us to appreciate our differences. So self-awareness is hugely important. And when we're talking about applying cultural competence in the helping realm, we want to be aware of really approaching people as human beings worthy of dignity and respect, no matter what, and applying things that may need to be modified person to person, culture to culture, depending on what the needs are of the person. And please, not assuming that one size fits all, even like a cultural group, not everyone within a subculture is going to respond the same way to the same thing. And every single person may need some nuance or modification. Talk therapy is not for everyone. Certain verbal and nonverbal communication styles may be very, very off-putting for some individuals and very welcoming to others. So doing and more kind of behavioral change and homework assignments and tasks may be appreciated by some individuals and not others. And understanding why may be more important than what we do about it. So again, kind of knowing something about who you're working with will make a difference. And where you work, you may end up working with certain cultural groups that have more of a presence in your work setting, in which case you want to definitely be educated as much as you can, and yet still be very open to the unique experience of the individual sitting in front of you. Super, super important. And, one other thing I will say about this, aside from read the chapter, it's very, very important and useful, is that it's our responsibility on the helping side to do our homework and also to say, help me understand your experience, but not to put the burden of responsibility on the client to be the sole educator. I need to do my homework, and when I don't know something, I'm going to own it, and I'm going to tell the client, I need to do some work on this, and I fully own that. So with that, I'm going to stop the video and pick up on chapter 5.